Star Fox Zero. I've taken my time on it, but the general consensus on the game is that it's bad. People have various opinions on why that is. A majority says it's the controls, others says it's the gameplay that has aged, others will point out repetition. And then there are others who are screaming from the hilltops saying that those reviewers are wrong, that the game is exactly what it needs to be, that the gameplay has an addictive quality to it. So which group is right? Well, surprisingly, both are. The $60 game for the Wii U has made friends and enemies, and has been one of the most difficult games I've come to analyze since I started this channel. It was so all over the map at every point within its gameplay that it took me a long time to come to this conclusion. I apologize for the lateness of this review, but the fact is, if I don't feel comfortable with my analysis, then I'm not going to release it. But now, that's changed. Before we dive in, if you haven't already, I'd recommend watching my review guide for this channel. The enhancer system is going to get a workout in this review, that's for sure, because Star Fox Zero takes so many factors I never would have considered into account. And for better or for worse, that puts this review on a whole different level. Let's start with the story. This is a retelling of the Star Fox 64 story. Andros, a once famous scientist from Corneria, has gone insane, and is now threatening the world with his armies. The Corneria army isn't able to keep up with him, and General Pepper ends up requesting the services of the group Star Fox, a set of ace pilots that include Falco, Peppy, and Slippy the Mechanic. Their job? Respond to the threats that Andros is sending at Corneria, and save the galaxy once again, while making a little bit of dough along the way. The story is typical of what you'd expect out of an arcade game. It's there to complement the action, and really nothing more than that. You get a brief description at the start of a mission of what's going down. A character or two will pop up and say something tangentially related to what's going on, and then there's an explosion at the end and everyone says hip hip hooray. Rinse and repeat. Your companions will shout one-liners now and again, and they aren't as good as their 64 counterparts. Fox, Peppy, and Falco's voices are a tiny bit off for me. Slippy seems fine, but then again he's supposed to be annoying, and he still does that job here. It's not like the writing is bad, it's what I would expect from an arcade game. And maybe nostalgia is blinding me here. It just doesn't gel well in the overall picture for me. There's good writing segments, like the final levels before making your way to Andros. When the crew stay true to their established personalities, things really do work well. A particular boss fight and a back and forth between Slippy and Falco really highlighted that.
What's it screeching about? Can't you translate, Falco?
Slippy, don't make me come over there.
Falco, tuck some sense into it or something.
Right, because I'm a bird, we must be friends. Come on!
But intermixed with that is writing and presentation that is dangerously closing in on meme territory. For example, whoever decided that Peppy should scream barrel roll every time you did a barrel roll with him, well, they need to be shot. That isn't Peppy's character, it never has been, he's the serious one. And while him saying it once in a while would have gotten a joke or an Easter egg across, it got so annoying that I was okay with taking damage rather than reflecting a shot with a barrel roll. It just was too out of the ordinary. I know that I shouldn't be making a big deal about lore in an arcade genre game, but regardless, I feel that an opportunity was missed. We could have learned more about the Star Fox crew, give more emphasis on why Falco's so cocky, go into Peppy dealing with having to abandon James, tell me something to like about Slippy. You didn't have to make it story-centric either, it could have easily been done in the secondary dialogue. Instead, the writing just lacks punch and effect. So if you're wanting something out of the Star Fox lore here, you're not getting it. So this is a dehancer. But come on, no one is here for the story, right? Silly me, you're here for the gameplay, and oh boy. Before we get into anything regarding the gameplay, we need to start at the controls, which is the most controversial thing about this game. And boy, let me tell you, I can understand it to a certain point, but we need to dive into it before we go any further in this review. See, rather than go the route of Star Fox 64 and just implement a set of button and joystick controls, Nintendo decided to use the Wii U to its full potential. And yes, I'm using air quotes around that. See, the pad actually shows your cockpit view. Meanwhile, the main TV screen is the traditional view that you'd expect from a game in the Star Fox franchise. Aiming is done via the Wii U pad by tilting it at angles to move the targeting cursor to hit enemies on screen. Now, you'd think that Nintendo, knowing that motion controls can feel very gimmicky to several people, would decide to put a non-motion based control scheme in there as well. But they didn't. Despite complaints by users that first tested it at trade shows, Nintendo stuck with the one scheme, only adding an option that would activate when firing for the motion part. Now this is where things get complicated. See, when you move the Wii U pad around and mix it with the movement of the R-Wing, your center reticule isn't very centered anymore, due to you moving around with the pad and maybe not coming to rest at the same base position. Thus, you'll find that the ship isn't aligned with the pad in the way you want. Luckily, there's a recalibrate button that takes your current position with the gamepad as how you want the pad when the screen is centered. When things feel off, go back to a natural position and recalibrate. You can do this as much as you want during gameplay, and you'll need to. This leads to a bit of a learning curve, and controls that won't feel natural on your first playthrough, that's for sure. In particular, those who play the old games will feel so disconnected at first, and the game isn't exactly going to help you get used to them. You'll run into things, you'll die repeatedly as you get hit and wonder what's going on. Getting used to aiming and when to use the gamepad and when not to takes time. If you're the kind of person who puts a game down after initial frustrations and not come back to it, Star Fox Zero will be your kryptonite, and that's a dehancer, and a significant one at that. But here's the thing, the controls are something that you can adjust to. I hated the game the first time I played through it, that's for sure. I despised it. But then I put it down, came back and started to play it again. And it got a little better. And then the third time, it got a little better. To the point where yes, I was enjoying playing the game. The controls themselves are usable. The precision you need to fire on all the enemies in question are there for you. They don't slip outside your own movement pattern. Now granted, this comes with the above caveats of learning when to recalibrate and not, but from a control standpoint, the game isn't necessarily horrible like people have said. I still don't understand why multiple schemes weren't used, but hey, it does work. But there's a bigger issue looming in the background that is the cause of the major problems here. See, the major problem that Nintendo faced was the dual screen action, the screen on the TV and the screen on the gamepad, and the context in which you had to deal with it. See, in other Wii U games, the change of context is usually gradual, and for good reason. In other games, the Wii U gamepad may serve as a map, or have a zombie sneak up on you like in Zombie U. The context change there was separate from what was going on the main TV screen, and usually came with a drop of action. But that's the biggest hurdle that a player has to overcome in Star Fox Zero. See, the information you're processing on both screens is relatively the same in this case. What you see in the cockpit is basically what's in front of you when on the main screen. But the problem lies in the brain's ability to process that information in a short enough time to react to it. And the ability to react to that then translates to problems with the controls, making it seem like the controls are at fault. See, first the player has to move their eyes from one screen to another. Okay, that doesn't take long. But that's where the processing of information begins. Now the player's brain is sitting there going, okay, I know I had an enemy or two in front of me, and there were walls on the left and towards the top of me. Where are they now? And you see, that information processing is where the major problem is. Because you're not just perceiving where a new enemy is, but you're putting it in comparison to a known set of information, and now you're having to adjust based on that. And this is where the biggest factor comes into play. The angle of your Wii U pad screen in comparison to the TV. It had to be conductive to that information processing. See, if I play the game with the pad directly in front of me, or at a parallel angle to the TV, most of the time I ended up having to fully switch up the context when changing perspectives. That meant the processing was longer, and thus worse results. You couldn't react as fast, and thus the twitch action probably got you hurt because you couldn't react to it. But when I played with either my body at an angle or the controller at a slight angle so that I could see both screens, but one was at a slight angle from the other, things got a lot better. because my eyes could process both sets of information at once, and the context change was ongoing. That meant that when I needed to change context, it was a lot shorter, and made it a lot easier to play. The game could have helped itself with a tutorial of where to place the pad here, but it didn't, so it had everything to do with how you held the controller, and the standard positions were not ones that really worked. That's the main problem here. If you're a Twitch and action gamer, and you could adjust to information quickly, Star Fox Zero is going to do a lot better for you. If you can't, Star Fox Zero is going to play horribly for you. It's so significant. That's an enhancer and a dehancer. Okay, that's out of the way. Now let's get to the actual gameplay, shall we? Now, at its core, Star Fox 64 is at the heart of Star Fox Zero. The gameplay has an arcade-like structure to it, where you have a stage broken into 2 to 3 parts, where you have to get to the end while keeping your vehicle intact. Of course, you'll want to shoot down as many enemies as you can, as your overall ranking at the end of the stage will come down to how many points you earned during a run, which is roughly equivalent to how many fighters you took down. You have your standard lasers that can be upgraded with power-ups twice in the stage. You can charge your lasers to release a homing shot, which if it hits multiple enemies at once, can give you a nice point bonus. You have bombs that can help deal massive damage on the screen. Weapons as always in the series feel satisfying to use, but this time around I really do like the non-homing lasers. There's something satisfying about them in dogfights in particular. The little shake of an enemy after hitting it, it's just wonderful. Now the gameplay with the R-Wing can be divided into 2 main sections. First is the straight progression through the stage with sometimes branching paths that you fly until you get to the end of. However, there are sections where you go into all range mode, where the playing field is an open area you can fly freely in. Each of them have their own strengths and weaknesses, but they complement each other nicely in terms of action. Like good old Star Fox 64, you've got a couple of abilities to pull out when you need to. If you got a bogey on your tail, brake to have them blast past you, and then of course blast them yourselves. Doing a somersault to get behind them is another option to change the odds in your favor. You of course have a boost meter to speed forward at any time, and the boost in this game feels significant, at least in the amount that you have. In all range mode, you can pull a U-turn to completely go the other direction. Now, unlike the 64 version, there's no C buttons here, so a good amount of these abilities are activated via combinations of the control sticks or specific buttons. The game's levels are designed to be short, replayable experiences in an arcade-like style. They range from rolling in the desert sand with your Landmaster to dogfighting in the depths of space with your R-Wing. Now you have branching paths, although a good amount of them are only available after the first playthrough, which I'm actually not a fan of. However, that adds to the replayability, although for medal purposes, there's really only one path to go on, the one with the most enemies. The game's levels were at their best when there was a sense of speed to them. Whether it be flying through the vacuum of space or making your way through a foggy forest, when Twitch action is at the forefront, the game is just great. You feel like a true fighter pilot, having to dodge and weave past your enemies while keeping your allies safe. In all, I'd say about half the levels hit this criteria, however. When the game is not at its best is when that stops. When you're really slow moving, or you have to stop to open a door or barrier. This decision baffles me. You're an arcade game in essence. This type of hacking gameplay, for example, would work in 3D platformers or adventure games. Here it's not only annoying, it really takes the wind out of the sails. There's certain levels that were made better with a different vehicle, mostly because that vehicle could move and do things a lot faster than the other. And that's the thing. Remember Sonic Adventure 2? Remember how you probably played the Sonic levels over and over and over again? You didn't play the Tails levels or the Rouge levels, you played the good ones. Yeah, that's the case here as well. Now, golding every level is great and all, but there's definitely levels that work a lot better than others, and those levels are a lot of fun. If that sounds like your kind of jam, then the game is right up your alley, and so, add an enhancer. Enemy variety is okay. You get a mix-up of them, from big robotic-like creatures throwing things in the environment at you, to spider-like tanks that have glowing weak spots. Now some of them are definitely cannon fodder to build up your score, but you will run into an occasional enemy that you'll need to really focus on, or it'll do serious damage to you. But frankly, I expected a little more variety in the end, in particular in the space battles. Just too many generic ships in that one. Bosses were very hit and miss, in particular with some of their mechanics. Some bosses were fun, taking out segments of their armor and whittling them down bit by bit. The dogfights with the Star Wolf crew was always a pleasure. Hell, I could play a dogfight Star Fox game for hours on end. Get on that, Nintendo. But some were just annoying. I get this boss has the electromagnetic pulse that you have to get away from, but in the second phases of this particular fight, they are so frequent that you maybe get one turret destroyed before you have to run away. Now maybe the game wants you to time things down to the seconds, but frankly, it needed a bit longer of an interval so that you weren't repeating things over and over again. It got boring. But what I don't get is the focus on secondary vehicles in this game. Let me ask you all a question. When you think of Star Fox, what do you think of? You think of the R-Wing. Sure, the Landmaster makes an appearance in Smash Bros. And all, but Star Fox is about flying around and shooting bad guys down. Which makes it so confusing why the game decides to keep on putting you in other vehicles, in particular with some of the alternate routes in the game. Now, variety is great when it works. I mean, the Landmaster? It's fine and all for a change of pace. The new secondary flight mode is nifty and all. It's a different type of experience, and it takes you a bit of time to get used to, but it does work. But when I'm having 2 to 3 missions with it, on top of other vehicle missions, it's just too much. The walker for the R-Wing? It just felt gimmicky, like it didn't need to be there at all. Sure, there were times that changing into it could help in hitting a certain enemy or avoiding colliding into a wall, but all I could think while playing it was, I want to get back into the air. Flying is faster, flying is funner, so why would I want to stay on the ground? Even after playing through the game several times, the walker was never fun. Ever. But the hovercraft one, which relies on hacking, why? Why this much of a change of pace? Look, developers, when you aim for variety, you aim for a particular type of variety. When I'm battling in Bayonetta, I'm looking for an alternative fight style and strategies from my opponents. I'm not looking for Bayonetta to sit down at the local coffee shop to do the Sunday crossword. That's what the hovercraft felt like here. See, that's one of the biggest problems that Star Fox Zero has, an identity crisis. It seems to want to evolve, but doesn't know how it wants to. The game obviously took strong inspiration from its 64 roots, but couldn't keep consistent within its own design. That itself is a strange problem coming from Nintendo of all people, who are some of the best in the business at it. It's like they made a game that they didn't want to make. The game only got into a real groove when I chose the levels I wanted to play back to back. When forced to do missions that went against that flow, the game was bad. But I'd also like to save a special screw you to Nintendo for the lack of options here. For example, do you want to know how I had to record this video? Well, I had to use a 3.5mm audio cable that connected to the Wii U gamepad to my PC. That's because all the voice lines and audio from the Wii U pad could not be played on the main TV screen. I'm betting the choice was made for experience purposes, but that's frickin' annoying. It doesn't help that Nintendo will probably claim this video for monetization purposes, which is fine I guess, but that is just annoying in terms of review and having to counterclaim it. It also doesn't help that I couldn't adjust the audio levels specifically for the music and ambient sound either. Honestly, that's a standard option even for a console game. Part of this once again has to do with a majority of the audio playing on the Wii U pad and that having a mechanical switch for it, but I just have to ask why. Now this is sad because there's some good music under the surface here. Take a listen. God, this was a long review, wasn't it? And that's the reason why this review took so long to score and to come together. There's so many factors that play into this game, and there's a reason why people hate it and why people don't. When the game is at its best, you feel the flashes of Star Fox 64 coming back. The action is high, you feel like a fighter pilot in the middle of space, firing shots left and right, and rolling around at the speed of sound. But when the game is at its worst, it becomes a nightmare of bad choices, frustrating you around every corner. In the end, Star Fox Zero barely scrapes into the niche category with a 70 out of 100. Meaning that if this genre is your jam, then it's worth a purchase, but most people should wait for a sale on it. But this being a Nintendo game, that may take a while. Now, as always, as I mentioned at the start of this review, my reviews have enhancers, and oh boy does Star Fox Zero have a bunch of them. Remember, only apply them if you strongly fall into the category. If you're on the fence about it, then you should not apply them. And I'm sorry that you may have to bust out a calculator for a video review. Some games are complicated, and boy is Star Fox Zero complicated as all hell. To finish this review off, I want to make a point about reviews. Star Fox Zero is the anti-professional reviewer game. So many of its design elements and gameplay mechanics did better over a period of time, and not from a critical first or second playthrough, and I really can understand why a lot of the big reviewers gave this game a low score. I could easily see a reviewer thinking he got the gist of the game after 2 playthroughs, and thought, well, that's it. But in particular, a special shout out to Arthur Guys, who didn't even bother to score and finish the game because he's bad at his job. Hell, the game has an easy mode, and he couldn't even be bothered with it. Yes, this is the 3rd review that I've called out Arthur Guys in. Have I mentioned how bad he is at his job? Finally, I'm going to host a Q&A on the channel regarding the Star Fox Zero review on Thursday at 9 PM Eastern, so I can answer questions about the review process and anything I missed in this review. I'll stream a run of the game as well. That way you guys get the full value out of my commentary. I'll see ya then. Thanks for watching. Like the video, share it with a friend, and subscribe if you want more content like this. In the description below, you'll find the Steam review accompanying this vid, along with social media that you can follow me on, Twitter, Google+, and Facebook groups. And if you want to support the channel, click that Patreon on the left of the screen. And remember, keep on gaming.